Hello everyone, we'd like to say hello to everyone on our live stream. We're streaming it live from across Canada. Up to now we've had about 21 people check in on the live stream to watch us. And there's about 15 or 20 people here in this room. Nigel's joking. Plus we have a BCVRS committee and a huge team of interpreters who will be facilitating the interpreting tonight. Can you see better now with the lights on? If you can please give us your feedback and comment on our Facebook page. Kim Wood is monitoring the Facebook page, so if you have any comments or feedback or any ideas, just post it on there. And you can view Jody on Twitter as well. On Jody's personal Twitter account. So there's two different places for you to provide feedback.
So who do we have here? Lisa, who am I? Lisa Anderson. Hallett. We're really happy to be here today. Thank you for everybody who came. We have Nigel here. Nigel Howard. I'm just asking what his role is. I work with the CRTC and I'm involved with all the events. The BC-VRS community. So first of all, I'd like to ask, have you all watched the full video? The long one? Yeah, you've all watched it? I know it's really long. So most of you have watched it, some of you are shaking your heads, but. So for tonight, we'll be talking about the videotape specifically and the proposal by the Interim committee. Explain what's happening up to now. There's one rule we like to implement enforce tonight. We really don't want a lot of conflicts. We really wouldn't like any interruptions while we're having the slideshow. Or any comments, anything like that. So during the slideshow, there will be blank slides and it will prompt you for any comments. Please take your time. If you have any random comments, we will save them for a later time and we'll discuss it then. Your comments and questions, they're really important, but we'll be saving them for later. The deadline to write the paper is August 28th, so we have to make sure to get everything done tonight and get to the point. If we have a great idea or a different perspective, then what we might do is Nigel's coming. So we'll talk about what the VRS will look like once it's set up. We're not going to be talking about what the VRS will look like. We're going to hold that thought and we're going to hold it for another meeting later on. So what we're doing tonight is specifically what the board will look like. I know you might have some concerns, but that's not the topic today. What we're really focusing on is the board. Who's going to be operating and who's going to be who's going to be operating and not. If you have specific concerns about that, I understand, but we'll have to hold it for a later date. How long will have the length? How long we have to hold? There's a deadline we have to follow, so that's why we're emphasizing. will be going into it a little bit, but that's not priority number 2. So that was Nigel. We introduced who we are. That was Nigel Howard.
Hello, Lisa.
Susan Masters, who's right
Hello,
over
Lisa.
there. Kimberly Wood. Senior Wood, right left. And she's working on this. Eva Facility.
Hello.
And Eva sitting over there in the front. There's Jody over there. Jody Burley. And David McDonald, he's in Winnipeg and he couldn't make it today. He'll be back in BC in 2, maybe 3 weeks. And you're saying that for some reason everybody in Winnipeg is sorry. We have some people from Winnipeg. So the 4 of us will be working on the 52nd. There's myself, Nigel, Susan, and Ava. We'll be writing them down and we'll put them into consideration if you have any comments. Okay, so tonight we're going to update on what we've done since the April 22nd announcement.
We're going to explain the proposal as succinctly as possible. We'll also take your comments and your feedback from the opportunity for your input. And it sits here at the end, it says parking lot. And those are comments that perhaps don't pertain to tonight, but we'll hold them to the next meeting.
If you have any comments, we can talk about it at the break. Hopefully putting them into the public. Sorry. So first of all, on April 22nd, CRTC said yes to VRS, targeting VRS in Canada. The CRTC laid out some specifications that we need to have. Of how obviously yes, so hopefully we'll follow all those specifications and everything will be implemented on time, on schedule. And I don't have anything to say. So this list of specifications, they could all be postponed or they might get it done early, but at the very least will be done in the fall. Why? And every year.
There's $30 million applied for VRS every year. And at the end of 3 years, there will be a review of how that money was spent, what issues came up, whether there were concerns. For example, maybe there were not enough interpreters, or perhaps the hours of the service were too limited. And those issues will be reviewed in the coming years.
Or if you think that maybe one company isn't enough and that you might want to add another one for competition or variety, then that might be a topic that comes up later either.
And maybe we'll see that $30,000 or $30 million is not enough. And maybe we'll get too much and we'll all get bonuses. Who knows?
Keeping in mind, I just want to make it clear that the TSP does not. We'll be reviewing the vocabulary of what TSP stands for. That stands for the telecommunication service providers. It's just the acronym for that, TSP. So the TSPs do not provide TRS. So companies like TELUS, Rogers, Shaw, they will not be providing VRS. So if you want, getting VRS, we don't go after TELUS. It's not like it wasn't a trial. All the TSPs contributed to a fund that will then run the VRS service.
Last fall, there was no interest from the TSPs to running VRS. They wanted a VRS company running video relay service in Canada, not a telecommunications company. The concern was that perhaps for Shaw or Bell, there might be service transferring back and forth, and so then if there was just one VRS service provider, it would be easier to work with all the TSPs. So we looked at the deaf community and what they needed for interpreting services and who was skilled for that. The TSPs are not able to go through that qualification period, and so they are more than willing to allow a VRS service provider to take over that role instead of a TSP.
So that means that you have an option of your internet company that you want to have the service provided through. So you can either go through Samsung, maybe just if you have your choice of devices, you have your choices of internet providers with VRS as well. So through the discussions, we agreed to have one independent group that would overlook the VRS.
And this would not be a group under the CRTC, this would not be under a TSP at all, this would be a group that was independent and really making sure as a regulatory body that VRS was being run the way the community wanted it to be run, meeting the expectations of the community. This would be an oversight sort of board making sure that Canadian expectations were being met. If one of those was not being met, there would be some accountability there, making sure that it was. And so of course, there's also the oversight over the financial issues. We want to make sure there's no fraud happening. We want to make sure that everything is being spent appropriately. And so this board will have the opportunity to regulate that, making sure that the VRS company is running true and appropriately the way they're supposed to.
So that's just a brief overview of what we discussed on April 22nd. And that was the notice of consultation. And that will be NTC 2014-107. 187, sorry. And that's the VRS policy number. So on the same day that they said yes to VRS, we sent the proposal to the VRS board. We sent a request what we want the VRS board to look like. That included the structure of the board and who would be included, and the directors. Did you want to add anything? And that's our focus for tonight. That specific proposal by the VRS board.
And I'll just add that this proposal is your opportunity to disagree or agree. Tonight is your opportunity to make any changes to the proposal. We would like to hear your input. Right now they're proposing 5-member board. Perhaps there's a concern over that. And we could counter-propose that we prefer to see 7 or 9 people on the board. So tonight is your opportunity to really look at the proposal of the makeup of that permanent board and decide how we would like to see that run.
So on June 16th, we confirmed who would be on the interim board. We chose 3 people. So 3 people that we picked, one of them was from CAD, and he's deaf. And plus another person from a TSP company. And his name is Jonathan Daniels. He's from Bell. Together, those two men, Jonathan and Frank, picked the third member, Gary Birch. And he's from the Neil Squire Society. He's a professional with adapting technology and advancing technology, and he has a lot of experience with CRTC. So those three together make up the interim board. And they're the ones who wrote up the proposal.
And they're just the interim board. I would like to emphasize that they will not be part of the permanent board that is going to be set up. So they are being paid right now. Their time is being recompensed as they research and work to see how this permanent board can be set up. They are the ones writing the proposal. And once a permanent board is established, those three will be stepping down. Their job will be over.
The temporary board wanted to consult with the deaf community all across Canada. And they discussed with over 70 different organizations. I saw the list myself, it was quite extensive. So there were 4 Vancouver organizations that responded. They were BC-VRS, the GVAD, Greater Vancouver Association of the Deaf, the Western Institute for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and the West Coast Association of Visual Language Interpreters. So from BC-VRS was myself and Kim Wood. Susan Masters from WDHH, and Doug McCurse, and Caroline, who is the Waverley president.
We know Luke and Peggy B from the GVD were also involved in the meeting. Just wanted to make sure the interpreters are okay if there's a lot of people to look at and keep track of here tonight.
So those 4 organizations were at a meeting that we had, and they had recommendations to us. And we had many discussions with them, and we made adjustments according to that feedback. The interim board
Had proposals of who could vote on the VRS board, and we were able to bring up some concerns about who had the voting rights on the permanent board. We'll get into that a little bit later.
They discussed a rough draft of the proposal and a lot of discussions on.
It really was just a presentation. It was informational. They had this presentation across the country. There was Vancouver, Regina, Toronto, Montreal, all across Canada. They had communities connecting in via the internet, making sure they were able to ask questions, have comments. And that was on June 18th.
And that was their proposal. We haven't made any adjustments to it yet. That was the proposal from the board. So that was just a rough draft. The videotape that some of you saw and the paper that some of you may have read was the final copy. So now we're going to go over the basic structure of what the board is going to look like. And so BRS is going to be a non-profit corporation. And there's going to be made up of members. And there are going to be members and a board of directors. The It's going to include an executive director with other staff included. The board members will be paid because they have a lot of responsibility and a lot of decisions to make regarding money and making sure that no fraud is occurring within the company. So our goal is, oh, do you have a question? I'm just wondering, the word administrator, is that a group or just an individual person? Thank you for your question. That's a very good question. And that's something we were confused about at the beginning as well. That's why we made a vlog about this. Defining everything. But I think we decided to drop the vlog. So the VRS board is the administrator. So thank you for your question.
I'll take this answer. Wayne was asking specific to the term administrator. Did that mean one person, or was that referring to the board? And as is explained, we also ran into that as a problem, and we wondered who the administrator was supposed to be. And it turns out it is the board. When they are saying VRS administrator means the board of directors with the executive director and support team. That was Wayne's question, just clarifying vocabulary. And you can stay where you are, really happy to have a copy of your. So it's tonight for revising this proposal. We cannot revise any of this. We cannot modify any of this proposal. This is what it's going to look like. This is the structure of the mandate. And I know the vocabulary, I know, and the verbiage is quite extensive and hard to understand sometimes. But as we go through it again and again, we're able to understand it more clearly and explain it to everyone. And this is going to be a job. So whoever applies and is on it is actually a serious position. It's not something to take lightly.
Okay, so everyone, okay, so we're up there. And next. So now the proposal, it's some serious information. And so I'm gonna try to explain as best as I can. So the board is gonna be made up of 7 members.
Yeah,
With 2 permanent invitees. So the 7 are going to be made up of 3 deaf and hard of hearing individuals, 1 person representing ASL, American Sign Language, the other person representing LSQ, the French Sign Language. And those 2 will then pick a 3rd person that represents both ASL and LSQ. And so those will represent the votes by the deaf community, those 3 individuals. We will have 2 other people that represent the TSP, so the phone companies. They'll be giving us their money, so it's important to have them involved in the decision-making process. The next people will be 2 independent directors. And so they'll vote together to make the number 5 an uneven number. And the phone company will pick those two individuals to be the independent directors. Those 2 independent directors equal as 1 vote. Oh, sorry. Interpret error.
The 2 independent directors are voted on by the other 5, and they'll be placed into the board that way. And now I will ask the season counselors to moderate this section, which is your opportunity to give feedback on what you've seen in the structure so far of the 7-member board. Just want to make sure everything's super clear, and if it's not, please ask us to review the information. This is the proposal coming from the interim board, and I would really love to see your perspective on what this is going to be, but just your perspective, your opinion is now being asked for.
Hello, if you have a question,
Just want to make it clear that right now the feedback we're asking for is on the number and the makeup of the board. So, Wade, welcome. I have a question.
Actually, you should come up.
do you want me to stand up here or do you want me to come up front? Okay, stand up here. So I saw the vlog and I watched the video. And I had a couple questions. So the interpreters are going to be part of the board, but they don't have a vote. I thought that was kind of interesting. If the phone companies, the TSPs, they have members that can vote. How is that different than having interpreters? And the board is paid, but they don't have a. Isn't that a bit of a conflict? I guess I don't really understand. Interpreters not having to vote through conflict of interest. I don't think they'll understand that aspect. Yeah, no, thank you for your comment. The 2 independent directors.
The 2 independent directors are agreed upon by the 5 other directors. And we can go into that reason as well. That way, because the independent directors will be people who are experts in finance or business or technology, perhaps, they will have whatever skill is missing already on the board. They will be picked by the 5 deaf and hard of hearing and TSP members, whether or not they're deaf or not. They're not. That's not the interpreting community at this point. The phone companies, we call them business people. I suppose. And then there is a good point to interpreters being on the board. Why wouldn't they have a voice there? Because interpreters are working for the VRS service. And perhaps there would be a conflict of interest if they were to have a vote on board. However, BC-VRS has already discussed this issue. And about how we feel about interpreters not having a voice on board. It was a very long discussion. And we thought perhaps interpreters, there should be a representative there to vote for the interpreters. And it's not a conflict of interest if this was a representative of ABLIC. So it's a hard acronym to get out sometimes. ABLIC is not union. ABLIC is not a provider of work for interpreters. They're not an employer. ABLIC simply monitors the field and makes sure that there is equity of service. And so we thought it was an important voice to include on the board. The interim board hasn't looked into that as deeply, but BC-VRS really feels that there should be a change and will recommend that an interpreting representative be on the board with a voice on that board. But we would love to hear from you what you think of that.
Okay. I had the same question as Wayne. So you're planning to ask about that, or Wayne's already asked the question, and I can see the conflict of interest. But BCVRS and WDHH are not on the board themselves, or were involved, and I think that's not a conflict of interest. So is WIDS now?
If there were a member coming from the deaf community, from WID or from somewhere else and being part of that board, how would that also not be a conflict of interest? I hear your concern about having TSP members who have a voice on the board, but not other community members. But we researched and we looked at Australia, the US, the UK, and the biggest thing that's missing is no involvement by interpreter organizations. So when we looked at those countries, we thought here in Canada, there should be a voice of an interpreter on the VRS board. And as Susan explained, ALEC is not a union, they're not an employer, but the member from ALEC who could be on the board would welcome the expectations of what VRS service would look like to the community, the interpreting point of view. And as I said, as we went through all the other countries, there was no interpreting voice on the VRS board. They were not able to talk to what the hours of work look like, what does that look like for health and safety. And so BC-VRS felt it important that interpreters do have a voice in that situation. We would like part of the proposal to have ALEC have the right to be on that board and make comments. And we have another question at the front as well.
So I don't think having an interpreter on board would be a conflict of interest though, because there's big companies being represented on the board, which means that they all work in the companies that are providing the VRS service. Is that not a conflict of interest for them? One other thing was the director, the executive director. Are they a volunteer, and is their staff work volunteer, and like how much are they being paid? And is there a person that we can contact for feedback? Like if we're having problems with our VRS, is there anyone that we can contact? I just want a little bit of clarification on that.
Good point, but
They're all having very good points, but a little bit off topic. I'm sorry, we have to be really strict about what we discuss and when. We have a deadline that we need to meet.
And some comments coming across.
Please go ahead. I was asking about the 7 members. 7-member board. I'm a little bit concerned about the number. I feel like there's a couple specifics missing. I see that we have deaf blind hearing, but there's no deaf blind members, and I'm a little disappointed by that. Where's the representation in VRS?
And I'll just ask you to wait for a minute. Our goal is to hear your concerns, and we are focusing on, I like this comment, if you feel that, one, AVLIC should have a voice on the board, there should be representation with voting rights. We'd like to hear your comments on that. And so who thinks that AVLIC should have a voice on the board? Yeah, we're looking at the one prior to the way we were checking if we're talking about AVLIC and CSVR. Really, an interpreter would be an interpreter, whether that was ASL English, LSD French. So if you support the idea of those interpreters having a voice on the board, please raise your hand. And we'll count, keep your hands up and we'll count. And this is for those interpreters having a voice on the board. Keep your hand up, so we'll get to the next one.
I'm just confused. Like,
If interpreters have a voice on the VRS.
yes, that's what we're proposing.
Who does not support interpreters having the right to vote on the VRS board? Sorry about that. We'll come to the next issue, which was why is there no representation of the deafblind community on this board? Perhaps a 7-member board is not enough. Perhaps there should be a 9-member board that also includes representation from the deafblind community.
She has a really good point. Again, we need to think that it's really a small group. Even having just 3 deaf and hard of hearing people on the board was a small number. What about immigrants? Should we have them represented as well? They have their own sign language that they're bringing into Canada as well. And government policies printed in all different languages. Is that to include the immigrants? So to exclude the immigrants, does that mean would be discriminatory against them?
So Susan, we're gonna get them.
And interpreters, they aren't just limited to ASL and LSQ. It can include any sign language. Okay. Hold your comments. Just hold on for a second. We're going to get back to the point of the discussion right now. All really good discussion points. But we want to give you the reasons as to why the board decided on 7 members. We wanted to have a small board because it's a working board. So the CRTC has already set up a limit for the VRS and what their board can look like. So the BC-VRS
wants VRS up and running in Canada in the fall of 2015. That's the CRTC promise. The interim board is really working hard, and the permanent board will be a working board. And their job will be to ask for proposals to VRS companies, to give the ideas of how best to set up VRS, etc. And so if this board grows larger and larger and larger, it will take a lot longer to make decisions. It will take a lot longer to get the work done. I'm not defending the decision of 7 members. However, I'm just letting you know the larger it gets, the more we will be.
So then is it going to be a proposal? Is that going to be a general roles of everybody involved? So you all wrote the proposal with the board members' roles. And without taking into consideration immigrants and the minority groups.
I guess to clarify what Wayne is saying is that those 7 members have a lot of responsibility. So perhaps if we increase the number of members on the board, there's a more likelihood of having more of the represented. Immigrants from other countries whose parents perhaps do not speak English, they come to Canada. The government already provides information in the language of their country of origin, whether it's written in French or Chinese or whatever, but now there is none of that provided for deaf immigrants. And so we do recognize that there are 2 official languages in Canada, and we have 2 represented on VRS. The 7-member board, their role would be to increase their responsibility to make sure those minority groups are included in the voices that are being heard around the board table. So their responsibility is to liaise with those communities and make sure that those voices are heard.
So this is just start at the basics. We're going to develop more once we get closer to setting up a permanent board. So these are just the basic outline of what it could look like. I do think you make a good point And I do think it'd be a good idea to have one deaf-blind representative on the board. Because you can't just exclude a disability group. Yeah, other comments?
And sorry, yeah, before we answer that.
Sorry, your sound is not very clear. Do you mind making it a little bit more? So I'm trying to understand the structure of the board. So we can. So who makes the person who makes the proposal is.
So I think the point that's trying to be made here is that LSQ and ASL, in the structure of the board, could pick that third deaf and hard of hearing member, and that could perhaps be a deaf person. That could be someone from the community in general, it could be anyone that the LSQ and ASL member could pick. And so it's just the same as it's advertised to the BRSs and the TSBs. They have the two board members, an interpreting organization, also a business per se. And then there'd be those two from the TSB. And then if we give voting rights to the interpreter, that gives businesses more power than the community, which is just a 3-person vote. That seems to weaken the vote of the community. There's not much power in that. It seems to be invalid there.
Okay. I'm just going to say wait till the next slide, so we're going to talk a bit more about the board and how the voting is going to look. We're going to talk about quorum and who gets votes and how they're represented. So some of these questions will be answered further on. So now, who wants to have a deaf-blind representative on the board? Raise your hand. Just repeating the question. Who feels that they should have a deaf-blind representative on the board? Raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Anyone opposed? And you were talking about you wanted a vote for immigrants on the board?
I think you're right. Canada has many deaf people moving to the country. Perhaps part of our suggestion is saying that here in BC there's a feeling that a 7-member board could be expanded, out of their responsibilities expanded, or ask them to consult with and recognize the minority groups such as immigrants to Canada who have different language of access. And also when we look at our Aboriginal community, I think there's a huge population in the north that needs to be considered as well, and that perhaps can be as part of our feedback to the proposal, that the board needs to recognize. I think Olaf's concerned about the board, and Susan saying the board is going to get huge and unwieldy and the work's not going to get done. However, the roles of those board members could be expanded to include recognizing the minority groups that we're talking about here tonight.
Okay, and then we have a comment through Facebook. Someone from out east has left a comment. And so we should have a DI interpreter on the board as well. So you have an ASL interpreter, an LSQ interpreter. Why not have the third one be a DI, a deaf interpreter? We're going to open this up for discussion. What are your A deaf interpreter should also be a non-voting member on the board. Okay, so do we have any comments about that, about having deaf interpreters represented? Go ahead.
I have a question here. I don't want to insult any deaf interpreters. That's not the intention. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But there is no formal training program for deaf interpreters.
That's true. There is no formal training for deaf interpreters. For me, I am a DI. I travel around to work for AVLIC. I think AVLIC represents interpreters, period, whether they're LSQ, ASL English, whoever they are. I think that AVLIC is a good representation of the interpreting community. And so I believe that if there were representatives from AVLIC on the board, that they would be a good representative of the interpreting community. Wayne is simply saying that deaf interpreters, or deaf people are already involved in the board. And Janice is also saying that representation is there on the board as well.
She's the new deaf board member.
So we're gonna have seven people on the board. So is there gonna be someone that we can give feedback to, and that will bring that feedback back to the board?
Next slide.
Yeah.
We're ready to go to the next one.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna be going to the next slide soon. Thank you, Nicole, for your questions.
We're
gonna
get a vision of the different groups of people that need to be represented in different organizations that need to be consulted. And this was also the June 18th meeting where we had 4 representatives and consultants across Canada happening with the interim board.
And we have people already in line for this, and we can definitely add representatives for immigrants and for deafblind people. But the advisory committee is a support group for the permanent board. So that can include, that will include those minority perspectives. Do we understand how that will look? I'm just trying to kind of close this discussion a little bit and move on. Do you guys understand what we mean? Susan just said that we should finish up this topic and move on. We're going to hold that topic for now, and we'll discuss more later. Just figuring out which slide we're on. Nigel's going to work on the technology.